Okay, we're ready to go.
Good evening. It's now 6:04 p.m. on March 2nd, 2022, and I will call to order this online public meeting. My name is Andy Gregg, and I'm the chair of the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission. You should be able to see tonight's meeting agenda on your screen. If you can't see the screen and have joined by phone only, I will be announcing the agenda items as we move through the meeting topics. Due to COVID-19, regular meetings and public hearings of the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission will be held in a virtual meeting room. This will allow for safe participation by commission members, staff, and any citizen interested in attending. Members of the public and applicants have joined as an attendee, which means you can see and hear the event if you've joined via computer or mobile device, or you can just hear the event if you've joined by phone. Other event participants cannot see your video, cannot hear your audio unless you are acknowledged by the commission chair or staff and are unmuted. This evening's agenda is planned as follows. Roll call and introductions. Prior meeting notes for approval. Public comment for subjects other than the public hearings on the meeting's agenda, as there will be a specific public comment period as part of the hearings. Design review, introduction, and replacement materials for historic buildings training. Project overview on the Heritage Farm wetlands. Committee updates and announcements, old business and updates, good of the order, and then adjournment. Before we do roll call and introductions, I'd like to make an announcement. It is with regret that I report that Felicia Garcia has resigned her commissionership in order to pursue a new professional opportunity out of state. Bailey was instrumental in launching Historic Preservation Commission's initiative to promote the histories of underrepresented communities in Clark County. I certainly enjoyed serving with Bailey and wish her every success. We'll start with a roll call of HPC members who are present at this meeting. Commission members, please say, "I'm here," after I call your name. Paige Alfuth.
I'm here.
Jan Bader. Julie Bond.
I'm here.
Morgan Frazier.
I'm here.
Greg Foos.
I'm here.
And Andy Gregg is also here. Bart, do we have Jan connected yet?
We have, it looks like an unnamed caller on the attendees. Susan, we might try unmuting. I haven't heard a response from her, from my email to her yet.
Okay, so if we do have a quorum, so if Jan joins the meeting as we are in progress, we'll have her let us know.
Yeah, I'll continue to work with her.
Thank you. Moving on to meeting notes approval. Does anyone have any comments regarding the draft of the February 2 meeting notes? I have one small one on page 4. The company Divine Consign, Divine should be spelled D-I-V-I-N-E. Any other comments on the draft February 2 meeting notes? Then at this time, I would entertain a motion to move for the approval of the February 2nd meeting notes.
So moved.
Is that you, Greg?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second that. This is Paige.
Thank you, Paige. It's been moved and seconded that the February 2nd meeting notes be approved as amended. All in favor, please say aye.
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 We have a unanimous acceptance. Please note for the record that the February 2nd meeting notes have been approved. We'll now take public comment on any items besides today's meeting items on the agenda. Please make remarks brief and to the point. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and I'll give an advisory when there's a minute left. Susan will provide instructions on how to make public comments for those joining us through their computer or mobile device, and for those joining by telephone audio only.
Okay, thank you, Andy. For attendees using their computer or WebEx application, if you would like to speak, please utilize the raised hand icon. You can do this by clicking the participant button or icon, the location of which depends on the device you're using. Staff will only acknowledge those attendees during the public comment period who have raised their hand by selecting the hand icon. When you are acknowledged, you will be unmuted. When you have finished your comment, please click the hand icon again to lower your hand. For attendees using the telephone, you need to press *3 on your phone's number panel to raise your hand. And when you're acknowledged, you will be unmuted. When you've finished, please press *3 to lower your hand. And please note public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person in order to accommodate all speakers. Okay. Hang on just 1 minute. Okay. Holly Chamberlain is the only person here this evening. So Holly, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, Chair Greg, commissioners, staff, and community.
Hello,
members.
Holly.
I have a few reports from the Historic Trust. At Providence Academy, the West Porch reconstruction project is making some good progress. Despite some weather challenges, the ledger board for the first—
Can't really hear her very well.
Well, let me try again. Is that better?
No,
Yes, thank you.
a little louder.
All right, I will try for some greater volume. Thank you. Good progress has been made on the reconstruction of the west porches. Despite weather challenges, the ledger board for the first level of porch construction has been installed, and it only goes up from there. In regard to mitigation for the removal of the laundry and boiler buildings and potential removal of the smokestack, all items required prior to the issuance of the demolition permit have been submitted to the city. The trust will be starting work later this month on an interior study at the Academy to help prioritize the next steps for rehabilitation. This project is partially funded by a Preservation Fund grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Jessica Ingeman of Meritus is the consultant. At Officers Row, the second year of the 5-year plan to rehabilitate the historic reserve chimneys is underway. The chimney project overall is projected to cost about $500,000, with approximately $80,000 per year being spent. Good news from the city, great progress has been made on the land bridge rehabilitation, and it is expected to reopen to the public this month. More information and updates are available on the city's website. And finally, an announcement. The trust is partnering with Repair Clark County and Clark County Master Gardeners on a spring garden prep workshop on Saturday, March 19th. You can sign up at historictrust.org for the workshop and also for a slot to get your garden tools sharpened. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly.
I'm sorry, Chair Greg, we do have one other person who does have their hand up.
Great.
Okay, Alexander, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, Commission. This is Alexander Gall. I was a former member of the Commission, and how are you doing tonight, Andy?
Welcome back.
Thanks. I am not here in any official capacity. I am on the Culture, Arts, and Heritage Commission, though, and it's a commission that's still getting its feet under it in terms of we're just getting going when COVID hit, and anyway, there's a lot of overlap between our two commissions. The Culture and Heritage part of the Culture, Arts, and Heritage Commission in particular we have a lot of common interests, and I'd like to see us try to work more together, or perhaps just be more aware of each other's agendas, what's happening. I have to admit, I've been pretty bad about attending the HPC meeting since leaving the commission. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to put a shout out for some cooperation and just, I don't know, awareness of each other's commissions. Sometimes feel like we're working in vacuums when we could be assisting each other. And we are having a retreat this weekend, and I think we'll have a kind of better idea of our path forward after that. So anyway, that's all I had to say, and keep up the great work.
It's a great suggestion, Alex. In fact, that might be a subject down the road where we could have an ad hoc committee, or maybe even have an individual who serves as a liaison between, thinking of yourself as one who knows how the Historic Preservation Commission operates very well, and that as Holly is a recurring participant in comments, maybe we could have the Heritage Group participate as well.
Yeah, I think there's some value to that, and I think sharing the business that you guys are up to, certainly, just reading over last month's meeting minutes, talking about the public art options at the Aegis 2, felt like this is something that the Culture, Arts, and Heritage Commission would be pretty interested in. So just stuff like that. I think there's a lot of commonalities.
Would there be an opportunity for a member of the Historic Preservation Commission to be in the audience of the Heritage Group?
Yes.
At a meeting?
Yes.
So if you were to let me know when that takes place, I'd be happy to participate.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Thanks, Alex. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, you too.
Susan, do we have any other members of the community who want to participate?
There is someone who just joined. He doesn't have his hand up, but would you like me to unmute him just to check?
Sure.
Rob, you are now unmuted.
Yep. I'm just here observing. No comment tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. At this time, go ahead. Did you want to say anything, Rob?
No, I just wanted to say hi. Acknowledge your
Oh, great.
Your reach out. Thanks.
Thank you so much. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Michelle Thompson to tonight's meeting for in-service and presentation. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, my pleasure. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. All right, I'm glad. That's important. Okay. I've done WebEx one time. Am I going to be able to share my screen without being a presenter? Does anybody need to give me some kind of control
Yes.
to be able to share just as a How's a headset?
I just gave it to you, so.
right. Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
All right. Good. Let me try it out. All right. And I guess I'll just introduce myself first. I've got an introduction in my PowerPoint, but I can just introduce myself. My name is Michelle Thompson. I am the Certified Local Government Coordinator at the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, also known as DAP, also known as the State Historic Preservation Office. I took over for Kim Gant, who may have done a training or two for you at some point just over a year ago. So look at me as your personal preservationist. My job is to help you. My job is to be here for you when you have questions. I am always here to help. I'm just a phone call away. I'm going to post my contact information on the last slide of my presentation, but please really don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I love being able to help, and there's no kind of problem too big or too small that I'm not willing to help with. So let me get started. Okay, let me share my screen here.
Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it sounds like someone is not muted and it's a little distracting. I was just hoping everyone could check that they're muted, except for you, of course. I'm hearing some background noise, so I just wanted to check with everybody. Thanks.
It sounds quieter now to me. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to make my presentation fairly brief. And then I'll leave some room for questions at the end. So let me share my screen. Share. No. All right. All right. WebEx is new to me. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen, everybody? Anybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Here we go. All right. Can you see the big screen, not the words that are in my notes for the presentation? Okay, good. All right, great. All right. So I introduced myself a little bit a moment ago. Just a quick about me. I live in Olympia. I grew up here. I've been back for just about 8 months. Before I worked for DAP, I actually was a historic preservation consultant in Idaho and Virginia. I did a lot of work back east, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, kind of all over. So lots of the work I did as a consultant was for CLGs. So like when you guys hire a consultant to do a project, when you go after a CLG grant for funding, that's what I was doing before I came to DAP. And it's something I love doing. I love working with certified local governments with small communities. So I have a degree in interior design from Spokane Falls Community College. I've got a BA in art history from Eastern, and I have a master's in historic preservation from Clemson University in South Carolina. Like I said, I'm really passionate about historic preservation, passionate about keeping communities intact. Like I said, I'm from Washington State, so I care very much, sometimes a little bit too much, about the communities in Washington State. But there it is. So like I said, my contact information is going to be posted on the last slide. So wait for that at the end. All right, let's get started. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to think about the use of alternative materials when the commission receives a proposal to replace historic materials, especially windows, on a building listed on the Clark County Register of Historic Places. So I'm going to talk to you about actual material alternatives for windows. But first, I'm going to pull back to give you a bird's eye view from the beginning with a refresher on how the design review process works. A lot of you probably know this. You probably know this front and back, but CLGs, board members are kind of in different places, and I don't want to assume to know where you are. So I think it's always good to start from the beginning. You may have new members. It's always really good just to have a refresher, even if you know this stuff. But the second reason that I want to kind of pull back and do a design review is because it's a really good way of just kind of getting a grasp of the underlying concepts and considerations that you want to think about when you're talking about the replacement of historic materials. So hopefully you'll kind of see how this all comes together. We're talking about design review. We're going to talk about how to do that. We're going to talk about the Secretary of the Interior standards, sure you all are familiar with them. I actually asked Susan if she would send those to you a few days ago. So, but we'll get into all that. But hopefully you see how this all comes together. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to talk specifically about some of those replacement materials for historic windows. And I'm just going to concentrate on windows tonight. We can talk about more alternative materials in the future if you want to. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. I think for tonight, going over design review and talking about windows is probably enough. But you can have more time with me than just one evening. I can come to any of your presentations, so no rush there. All right. So the basic steps of the design review process, they're literally spelled out in this passage. I took this from the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission's rules and procedures. So once a property is listed on the Clark County Heritage Register, any work done on the property, which will affect identified historic features contributing to the placement of said resource on the register, or something that would ordinarily necessitate a building permit, will in addition require a certificate of appropriateness. Hopefully I'm going to make that a little bit less confusing what I just said. Let's look at how that looks in action. So I kind of made this visual here to help you a little bit with how the process works, just how the design review process works kind of from cradle to grave. So number one, a property is added to the Clark County Register of Historic Places. Very importantly here is that the nomination forms contain language that directly identify the building's historic materials and features. These are what we want to protect. And I'm going to go into this into more detail in just a minute, but for now, start with the nomination, right? You nominate a building or you nominate something to the local register. So two, if and when a building owner that has a building listed on the Clark County Register, when they apply for a permit, there should be a flag at the planning department that says something like HR on it. That means that it's on the historic register, right? So it flags them, this is a historic building, right? Want to keep an eye on this. So once that gets flagged, this is what happens. Goes to Jackie Camp. So Jackie's alerted that somebody that owns a building on the historic register has applied for a permit. So two things can happen. If the permit application is for work that replaces or repairs identified historic materials, we'll talk about that more, what those are in just a minute, or features in kind. Basically, if they're applying for something that's like an exact replica of the feature, they're going to use exact same materials, right? It's one for one, it's exact same thing. It's a staff review. It's called a type 1 review. According to your procedures in Clark County, type 1 review, it goes to Jackie and it's a staff review, right? So that's usually a pretty one and done process. But if the application is actually to replace or alter a historic feature, historic materials with something new, something different, this is when it kicks into the type 3 review, right? And this is when the commission reviews something. So this is where Jackie then passes it over to you. Just as an aside, you guys also have the right to review additions to buildings that are on the Clark County Register. If you have any historic districts, I'm not sure that you do have any local historic districts, but if you do, or if you ever did have a local historic district, new buildings in those districts, you could also review those. We're not going to get into that right now. We're just going to basically talk about replacement materials, but just so you know, you also have the right as a commission to review those. Yeah, so for right now, we're just going to focus on those materials. Okay, so is that the building that you guys meet in at Fort Vancouver there that I have pictured? I think I found the building that the Preservation Commission meets in. I might be wrong about that. So for the type 3 review, the commission is tasked with reviewing proposed work on the building that might alter and adversely affect historic materials and features. So how should the commission do this, and how do they ensure that the review is fair and unbiased? When reviewing the proposed work, you want to be familiar with exactly what the identified historic features and materials are for the building, and you want to do that by referencing the original nomination form for the building. You're going to weigh the proposed changes by the applicant against the set of criteria known as the Secretary of the Interior standards. You probably are familiar with these. Like I said, I had Susan pass them along to you. If you're not, if you haven't read them before, these are your criteria, standards for reviewing changes, changes to historic register buildings. So you should have those. If you don't have a copy, get a hold of me. I can resend them to you. Okay, so 5, you've reviewed it, right? You've reviewed the proposed changes. They meet these Secretary of the Interior standards, works in line, great. Then this is when you can issue as a commission a certificate of appropriateness, right? Often called a COA. And then the property owner of the historic building can proceed with the work. So the goal really is to maintain as many historic features and materials as possible on these locally listed buildings. Basically, you want to ensure that the existence of those materials and features that initially helped get the building onto the register remain, that they stay, you know, that they stay intact. You know, we've all seen buildings that are historic, but they've been so heavily altered that you can't even tell that they're historic anymore, right? You want to try to avoid that. As much as possible. It doesn't change, you know, what happened there or who lived there, but, you know, it can really alter stuff to the point where it's not really historic anymore. And it might not even be eligible for the register anymore if it gets altered too much. So that's the process in a nutshell. Okay, so pictured here, this is a screenshot of one of your Clark County Heritage Register nomination forms. In these forms, this is where you're going to find those identified historic materials and features I keep talking about. They're listed here. They might be in the narrative. I've seen them kind of just listed straight out in these forms. Every CLG in Washington State uses a different nomination forms. Yours are really good. They're really thorough. They list stuff out. I was impressed. I was impressed with a lot of stuff from your commission, by the way. This is just one of the things. You have a really good website. So you've got a lot of stuff going for you that's really clear, but good job on the nomination forms. So I want you to know that historic features go by lots of different names. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as character defining features. They might be called contributing features. When we talk about historic character of a building, we're just referring to these identified historic features. It all basically comes down to the same thing, but sometimes that stuff's interchangeable and it can get confusing. So. All right, so I took this clipping from the nomination form from the 1891 Nelson farmhouse, which I'm sure you know is listed on your local register. So the form says that when the Nelson farmhouse was listed, the house had its original brick foundation. It had lapped wood siding. The nomination also describes the windows as tall of various sizes, that they have double hung sashes, 1/1 lights, plain surrounds, decorative carving underneath the windows, all original. We're going to get back to the windows in a little bit, but just for now, know that what was called out in the nomination form is great. This is exactly how you would expect farmhouse windows from 1891 to look. And clearly the person, that might have been one of you that wrote this nomination or helped with this nomination, clearly the person that listed this stuff in your nomination form was thinking about this. This is the stuff that you really want to protect, right? Those original features of the building. So this is design process will protect those features. So now we're going to dig deeper and we're going to look into the Secretary of the Interior standards. I've mentioned those a few times. This is what the commission uses for design review. First, I want to remind you that in order to remain fair and unbiased, this is a question a lot of commissions have for me. And again, I don't know how much you know. I'm not sure, you know, exactly how you operate meetings or what. I don't know any of that. So I just want to kind of make sure that I cover everything with you. I just want you to know that in order to remain fair and unbiased, when you're conducting a design review, the commission is tasked only with reviewing changes to those identified historic materials and features that are spelled out in the nomination, like the stuff that we just looked at. As I said earlier, the commission can review additions to listed buildings, new construction, if you have local register districts. All of this is laid out pretty clearly in the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission rules and procedures. If you haven't read that before, it's a really awesome document. And again, it's one of the better ones that I've seen that really lays out your procedures. So if you have questions about stuff, consult that. It has, it's going to have answers in it for you for how the commission works. So always just a good idea to read it, read your local historic preservation ordinance. So in that same vein, while the commission should stick to what they can review, they should also stick with following unbiased criteria when they conduct a design review, again, by referring to the Secretary of the Interior Standards. As you can see on your screen, the Secretary of the Interior Standards they're literally called out in the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission rules and procedures as the criteria the commission uses for design review. The Secretary of the Interior Standards are very, very common. They're formulated by the National Park Service. They're based on historic preservation best practices. It's kind of one of those things that as a professional preservationist, you kind of have to know, right? You have to kind of have these memorized. They're the golden rule. These are kind of the gold standards for preservation. So these are your criteria when you're reviewing changes to a listed building. There's 10 of the standards in all. They're just kind of bullet pointed standards. We're going to focus on a few of them here. I'm not going to go, some of them kind of go far afield and we don't really need to talk about all of them here tonight, and you have them, so you can look at them on your own. But we're going to talk about a few tonight that have more to do with the replacement of historic materials. All right, so the Secretary of the Interior Standards, they're based on the concept of rehabilitation of a historic building. So basically, rehabilitation, it acknowledges the need to alter or add to a historic building to meet continuing changes or retaining the property's historic character. So no one expects historic building owners to live in a museum. This is one of the things a lot of people misunderstand about historic preservation. This is literally one of the most contentious parts of historic preservation, right? But we know historic buildings are supposed to continue to serve a purpose. If they're not livable for modern use, right? What's kind of the point of keeping them around? We can't just have cities full of historic house museums. So buildings can and should keep up with the times and needs of inhabitants, but the Secretary of the Interior Standards help us be thoughtful about the way that we alter or discard historic features and materials. So just keep that in mind. It's okay to change, it's okay to move forward, just with a lot of thought in the Secretary of the Interior Standards guide in that process. So we're going to start with Standard 6. This is really the most relevant when we're discussing the replacement of historic materials. So this is what Standard 6 has to say. Deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. When the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. Replacement of missing features shall be substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. So notice that it says where possible, materials. I really want to push this concept to underscore that preservation realizes that there are several reasons why the materials that make up a historic feature might be so severely deteriorated that they just can't be repaired. And sometimes it's not feasible to replace them with the exact same material. We also call that, right, replacing it in kind with exactly what was there before. Sometimes this is because of cost concerns. Sometimes the historic material just is not available anymore. And sometimes the craftspeople that did some of this work, like historic stucco. Recently, we had somebody trying to find a craftsperson to do historic stucco, and we just literally could not find anybody in the area that had the craft or the knowledge to do that anymore. So there are reasons why you would use different materials. Again, cost is one of the things, there's a big issue right now with construction costs. So it's okay to take that stuff into consideration, and we should take that stuff into consideration. So sometimes it's just, it's just not an option to use the original materials. But I also want you to notice that Standard 6 says that the new features shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities. Now, this is really important. Of course, as I just said, the commission should advocate for retaining historic materials. You shouldn't just approve a substitute material because the property owner says they want a substitute material, right? That's not really a good enough argument. However, you also kind of want to pick your battles. In the cases where a substitute material seems like the best option, the new feature should match the old, just like it says here in design, color, texture, other visual qualities. That's when it kind of becomes extra important, right? When you're using a substitute material. So with this in mind, let's look at a couple other the Secretary of the Interior standards. There's the Nelson House right there. Standard 2, it says that the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. Again, when we say historic character, we're talking about those historic features, right? That stuff that's called out in the nomination form that you want to protect. So notice those windows on the Nelson farmhouse. As we know from the nomination, these are original. They were called out in the nomination form. When I look at these windows on this house, those are 1/1 sash windows. They have really thin profiles. This says 1890s farmhouse in the West to me. However, if I didn't know better, if I couldn't get up really close and inspect, I would know for sure that those were the original windows, right? Just by looking at the profile, kind of the placement of them, they look like what an 1891 house should look like. I know there would, but I might not know that if I hadn't read that in the nomination form. So, right. So staying on the topic of windows, take a look at these windows on your screen. They're all nice looking windows. There's nothing that's terribly offensive here. However, standard 3 tells us that each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. So think about how one of these windows would look if you added it to the Nelson house. These are appropriate for other houses, but not on the Nelson house. Any of these on the Nelson house would create a false sense of historical development. Farmhouses in the 1890s in Washington State just didn't look like this. You just wouldn't see windows like this on that type of building. Right, so moving off of windows just briefly, we're going to look at standard 4. And it says that most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. So I think this is one of the really interesting standards. I think this one is kind of fun. It's kind of fun to think about. So sometimes buildings were altered so long ago that the alteration actually becomes historic itself. The National Register of Historic Places, it uses 50 years as the cutoff for when a building is considered to be historic. I know that sounds kind of arbitrary. We had, there had to be a date, there had to be something, right? So some way of measuring. So if you look closely at that black and white photo of the Nelson house down on the bottom, if you look at those porch posts, it's a very old photo of that house. You look at those porch posts, they are definitely not what is on the house now. And the post or the photo at the top was something that I snapped from Google Street View the other day. Those are very turned woodwork posts. But you could have fooled me. Like those posts at the top look exactly like something that I would expect to see on a farmhouse from the 1890s. They're pretty synonymous with that, right? The Victorians were able to do this stuff. They had invented ways of working with working with millwork, so they kind of did this stuff because they could, right? And so this is what I would expect to see on a house from 1891, but I don't know that those are original. I don't know, looking at that older black and white photo, I don't know that that's original. So you got to ask the question, what was there? Were those on the black and white photo, were those there originally? Did somebody conjecturally add those ones at the top? I don't know. But it's a good reason to have historic photos on your nomination forms, and just to have, a general sense of kind of what should be on a building from a time period in general. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I was surprised to see that those weren't original, that those weren't always there. Okay, so there's a lot more we could talk about with that. It's just something I wanted you to think about. In here, kind of on that same point. Have you ever seen like a 2-story downtown building that was built around 1900 that had a storefront added in the 1950s? So I think that storefront from the 1950s is really cool, but it's been there for so long now that it's actually historic in its own right. So, if something like this came in front of you, what do you do? How do you think about that? So anyway, food for thought. Great. Moving on, this is the last standard we're going to talk about. This is standard 5. Distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques are examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property shall be preserved. So look at the decorative carving underneath the windowsills. This again is the Nelson House. Those were called out on the nomination form. This is definitely a distinctive feature. It helps characterize this house. So you've probably figured out by now, because I keep talking about it, that the Secretary of the Interior standards, they reiterate how important the character of the historic building is. So again, we want to see original materials and features repaired and replaced in kind, you know, wherever possible. But if a substitute material must be used, then concentrate your efforts on maintaining the character and original visual aspects of the feature. And the reason that I kind of harp on this or stay on this is that I know that a lot of commissions get nervous about approving a change in materials. And I just want you to know that it is okay. And certain, you know, in certain circumstances, it is okay. When it's called for, it's okay. The standards are supposed to work loosely. They're supposed to be a guide. You know, they're not prescriptive for every situation, but they do help you kind of come up with what's best to do for different situations. But there are situations where it is okay to switch out a historic material. Just think really critically about it. Right. So, all right, final thoughts on the standards, and then we're going to actually talk about alternative materials for windows. I just said this, visual character is important. Have I not said that already a million times? So if you look at those little sash bars, those are the things that divide the windows on the Nelson House. Again, those scream Victorian farmhouse. To me, those big plate windows on this on the Nelson House, that's Victorian technology. They did that with these kind of big plate windows instead of those little, you know, divided windows, you know, with the little squares. They did this at the time in the 1890s because they could. They developed the technology to be able to do it. So, you know, when you look at something like the Nelson House, it's a big artifact. It's a big historic artifact that talks about 1890s in the Western United States. So anyway, those are the things that we want to preserve. Visual character, really important. All right, so now that we have some of the philosophy for replacement of historic features down, let's talk materials. There are three possible materials that you might come across for historic windows. Those are wood, aluminum, and steel. Wood is obviously the most ubiquitous, but aluminum was common in the mid-20th century, and steel is sometimes seen on industrial buildings around the turn of the 20th century. A lot of times people will think that aluminum windows on mid-century buildings are replacement, but that's actually very likely what was there originally. So now we're going to look at the alternative materials for replacement windows. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons of each. All right, so when it comes to substitute materials for windows, there are pretty much two common options. The first, of course, is vinyl. As you know, replacement vinyl windows are extremely common. We see them everywhere. I live in a historic district. A lot of houses in my neighborhood have them. The selling point used in their advertisement is almost always energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is almost always the reason that homeowners apply to replace their historic windows. So let's start with talking about the pros, or what at first glance appear to be the pros of vinyl windows. So vinyl replacement windows, initially, they are less expensive than wood replacement windows or other materials. Initially, they also do save in energy. That's when you compare it to a neglected, unweather stripped original wood window, right? Of course, anything's going to perform better than a neglected historic wood window. Often they have a lifetime warranty, right? They come with a lifetime warranty. That's one of the selling points. They don't rot or decay from moisture or insect damage. The cons are, unlike wood, they're not repairable. They expand and contract with fluctuating temperatures, meaning that in some climates, the seal between the window frame and the glass pane, it can break. It can greatly reduce the insulating abilities of the windows, kind of the reason that they were purchased in the first place. It's relatively difficult to find vinyl windows that produce the profiles of traditional wood. So think of those very thin sash bars on the Nelson farmhouse. This photo here of a vinyl window was one of the closest I could find. It's very difficult to find something, especially that have those thin profiles in vinyl. So, oh, and finally, that lifetime warranty, it's often only for the non-glass material. So it's often only for vinyl surrounds, not the glass in the window. A lot of times they don't tell you up front, but the glass will have like a 10 or 20-year warranty on it, not the lifetime warranty. That and there are a lot of other exceptions that are often buried in the fine print when you're purchasing vinyl windows. So for example, I was just reading earlier, a very well known vinyl window company's warranty. It reads that their 20-year warranty only covers the glass. And then after 2 years, it doesn't cover the cost of any labor. So you got to think about that too. You know, if your windows fail after 2 years before the 20-year warranty is up, but after the 2-year warranty is up, I think I'm making this more confusing, but you won't be paying to replace the glass, but you will be paying for the labor after 2 years. You got to kind of take that into consideration. So when you're calculating the true inexpensive costs of vinyl window replacements, you just need to take all of that stuff into consideration. All right, the second common option for the replacement of historic windows is fiberglass. In simplest terms, fiberglass replacement windows are superior to vinyl pretty much across the board. So it's much easier to match fiberglass windows to traditional wood profiles. So it's a better choice when you're trying to maintain that historic character on the exterior of the house. Like vinyl windows, fiberglass does not rot or decay from moisture or insect damage. They're stronger than vinyl windows. They resist warping and cracking. And they can actually be up to 15% more energy efficient than vinyl windows. They generally have a longer lifespan. But still, you always want to make sure to read the fine print, you know, if you're looking at fiberglass or any material. The big drawback for fiberglass replacement windows is the cost. They can be up to 30% more expensive than wood, and even more so than vinyl replacement windows. All right. Another thing to consider and to read up on are modern interior storm windows. I love these. I'm not going to hold back and tell you that I don't love these. I think that they're a pretty wonderful invention. There are a few products on the market just recently, and actually where this photo comes from, the Washington State Governor's Mansion was recently fitted with a product called Indo Window. It's an interior storm window. So I'm not specifically endorsing Indo Window, but I am endorsing interior storm windows in general. They fit really snugly into place. They're quite a bit less expensive even than vinyl replacement windows. They can be removed with a season, super easy to snap in, snap out, and they don't disrupt the historic character of the building from the exterior. So the Department of Energy says that, well, the older storm windows, so this applies to both interior and exterior storm windows, were typically just clear glass. These new models, a lot of new models on the market, are available with low E coating. So it's a low energy coating, and that reduces heat transmission through the storm window. So these low E storm windows, they're more insulating. They reflect heat back into the house in the winter and can help the house stay cooler in the summer. So I think this is a really good solution in a lot of places, so something to think about. If I were going to replace, I have historic windows on the bottom floor of my house, but if I were going to, and I have older storm windows on the outside, but if I were going to pay to replace, this is what I would consider first in my own home. Okay, so I'm a preservationist, so obviously I'm biased in favor of retaining original materials when at all possible. I know that you are likely biased in favor of historic materials too. However, I can't say with confidence that if you restore original wood windows, especially correctly, they will be as or even more energy efficient than replacement windows. Cost less. It provides a much faster kind of return on your money than replacing with something like vinyl. There's actually been studies in the past few years. There's a lot of literature on cost saving and energy efficiency benefits of repairing, maintaining, retrofitting existing wood windows. Often it's simple fixes like weather stripping that can lead to more energy efficiency. This coupled with other simple, relatively inexpensive fixes like those interior storm windows can have a lot of benefit. And again, often, if not always, if done properly, can be more energy efficient than replacing replacing your windows. So maintaining the character of the original windows is important, but obviously cost savings and energy efficiency are practical concerns of most building owners. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But as you know, it's really important just to kind of consider all the options in favor of the quick fix. It's never to say that there's not circumstances where you would want to replace the historic material, but just, you know, be very thoughtful. Consider the standards when you're thinking about replacement. At DAP, we have a lot of resources, and I will follow up with a presentation. I'll probably send you a lot more than you ever wanted to have about the benefits of cost, energy efficiency, aesthetics of maintaining your historic windows. If you're interested too, another thing we might consider at some point is having your commission host a workshop for the repair of historic wood windows. There's lots of options, you know, and if you're having a lot of people come to the commission proposing replacement of their historic windows, there are educational things that we can do, that we can bring to people and help you talk, speak and feel a little bit more confident talking about the stuff. So it's an option. Okay, the last thing I'm going to leave you with for tonight, I said that I was going to follow up my presentation with some various resources. Like I said, I will send those things out to you. But one of the links I will send you is going to be for this book. This is Virginia McAllister's A Field Guide to American Houses. So even if the commission just has one copy that it shares, this book is so valuable. Absolutely every preservationist I have ever known has this book. It's that important. It's a chronological field guide. It gives context and lots of visuals. It also calls out exactly what historic features are found on what building styles. So say an applicant has ugly windows from the 1980s on their 1880s home, but they don't have any pictorial evidence of what was there originally. You could consult McAllister, you could consult this book and get a really good idea. So, and also just being, you know, as best versed as possible in historic styles, identifying historic buildings chronologically. It gives a lot of context. So I would highly suggest investing in a copy of this. If you see over on the right, there's some examples of historic windows. Those look like from like the 1920s, but it gives you all these kind of ideas of things that would have been there originally. So like I said, especially if you don't know what was there originally, this is a really invaluable book. I have it right here. I have 2 copies. Keep it with me, so consider it. I'll send you a link to it. All right. Right, there's my information on the screen. That's my email address. That is my phone number. And do you have questions for me?
Hi, Michelle. I have a question. This is Julie.
Hey, Julie.
Hey. Earlier, we were talking about the nomination form and the distinguishable features about the property or the home or what have you that is distinguishable.
Yeah.
If we get a nomination that doesn't really include that type of detail, maybe they have some detail but not extensive, would that be reason to ask them to redraft and to come back a second time?
Most definitely, Julie.
Okay, because my concern is if they don't include everything, then are we then limited? Because you said we were not able to base any decisions if it's not already in that nomination.
Yeah, you don't want to start commenting on, you know, things that, you know, if there was an addition that was done to the house, maybe in the 1980s or whatever, it was something that wasn't on the nomination. You know, you really just want to focus on those called out historic features of the building, because that's what you're trying to protect. So yeah, that's why the reason that I start with talking about the nomination form to kind of get to where we got to is because it's so important. That really is kind of your get out of jail free. You know, it's the thing that you have that you can consult and you can say, this is exactly what this building looked like. This is all the documentary evidence that we have for this building when it was added to the register. So as thorough and as much information as you can get is always the better. Because yeah, when somebody wants to make changes to that building, this is what you're going to consult. to hold it against. So yeah, definitely is a reason to ask them to redraft.
As a follow-up though to that, even if
Mhm.
they did though, wouldn't we still be able to make assessments, objective assessments based on the style and the time period of the home? And like you just referenced that book, which I actually own as well.
Good,
You know,
great.
you would still have resources that you could, that if there was an application to make alterations that didn't
Yes.
fit in with that, that would be acceptable. Even if they didn't have those specific things in their nomination, we could still be objective and say, it doesn't fit within, you know, this,
Yes.
whatever the a change would be, we would still be able to make that judgment regardless of that specific item being in the nomination.
You would be, and especially when it's something that, okay, so say that you are looking at, say, I'm just going to go back to the Nelson house just because we've all been looking at it. Say the Nelson house had replacement windows done in like the 1980s on it, right? And then the new owner, or the current owner of the Nelson house, wanted to fit windows onto their house that actually reflected the historic or the original windows on the house. That's kind of a different, I didn't want to confuse you by kind of going here. There's some different kind of philosophies when you're looking at like the rehabilitation of a building. This would be the restoration of something that was there originally. So this is definitely something that you can do. This is definitely where you do have some leeway when you're looking at what would have been there originally. And again, that's why having that pictorial evidence of what was there originally, say like those posts on the Nelson house, say that the we had that historic photo, and maybe that was, the black and white photo where you didn't have those elaborately turned columns that are there now. Say you had pictorial evidence that those were the first and those were the original that were on that house. Then the owner could make a case that they wanted to take them back. And even though the ones that are on it now are appropriate for a house of that period, you've got that pictorial evidence and you can take it back to the original. But that's more of like a restoration of something that was there at another time period. But again, and the Nelson house actually has a couple windows on the side that are replacement windows. So say they wanted to get rid of those, I think they're vinyl. If they wanted to get rid of those and put in some more appropriate windows for an 1890s farmhouse. Yep. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure, of course. Great. Yeah. And there are even some, I don't know if you can see this very well. I don't want to, but there's a building in here that looks very similar to the Nelson house. It's from the same period, but it's got very similar windows and stuff. This is from my Virginia McAllister book. So, if you didn't know what was there originally, this would be something that you would want to look at. And when you look at this book and you look at from the time period, you see those 1/1 big plate glass windows that have the little thin sashes on it. So yeah, if you don't know what was there originally, this is a great reference. Does that help without confusing too much?
Yeah, no, that was great.
Okay. All right, good.
And I think it was a really good example of,
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to confuse you and I don't want to overwhelm you. I tend to get really excited about preservation and I want to tell you everything. So I'm trying to not tell you too much stuff at once. But yes, that's completely appropriate, Julie. Yeah, it's another philosophy. It's another approach for the Secretary of the Interior Standards, but it's completely fine to take stuff back for restoration as long as you have some kind of evidence of that what was there.
I have a question. This is Paige.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation.
Sure.
I was wondering how often it is for a commission to request to review specific shop drawings when it comes to windows, and or who regulates if it is complying to the correct trim, and would a commissioner go out and measure themselves, or how does that process work?
You can. I mean, if you want to do, stuff on site, I mean, it kind of depends on so many things. A lot of people will put if it's the person that originally put the house on the register, they may be really excited to have you all come out and help them and measure and actually do, there's a thing called a molding comb that I have in my kit. You can stick it on a historic molding and get the exact, dimensions of exactly what it looks like if you want to go, that far. I know you guys do site visits once in a while, don't you? I don't know if you visit. Okay, right. So I mean, it depends on it depends on the situation and kind of how involved the owner is, you know, how acrimonious they are to wanting you to come over and do that kind of, you know, if it's somebody that bought a house on the register and isn't super thrilled about the fact that it's on the register, you might have a different case, but you know, that's one of the factors to consider. You know, it doesn't need to be exact. We're not looking for like exact replica, but you want to make sure overall that it looks, at least from a distance, that it looks like what should be there. You know, you don't maybe need the exact proportions, you know, of the original windows, but something, you know, when you're talking about the profiles being really thin, for those old farmhouses, again, you know, that's a feature. And, you know, like I was kind of stressing earlier, you know, they did that at the time because they could, you know, and these buildings are artifacts, you know, they tell a story of the time, and those details can end up being pretty important. So, you know, and think about too, you know, if you're looking at like a commercial building or something downtown, the stuff on the upper floors is maybe not going to be quite as important as the stuff that you're going to see right up close, but just kind of still getting that sense where it's not glaringly obvious that it's something from a different time period. You know, a lot of the vinyl windows, you can tell them because they sit really close to the front of the building, and historic windows tend to sit back, right? They're not as flush with the building, and they have these kind of beautiful profiles and shadows and stuff. And it's little stuff, but it does actually add to the character of the building and what was there originally.
Yeah, I was surprised. There was a video that we were sent that showed just like distinctive differences of like the same building, and it's like you had to double take to even see some of the differences, but then once you did, they kind of stuck out. But they also mentioned like if it's higher up, it doesn't, the detail gets lost. But I thought it was interesting how different it can actually be if you change the material or so.
It can be really glaring. Well, like the Nelson House has this particular siding on it that it was a Victorian invention, and they did it because they could do it with the millwork. You know, it's got this what's called like a Dutch lap siding, and it's got these really kind of deep shadows on the profiles and stuff, and that's so from that time period. You know, and if you took those off or put, you know, even put a different material on there, it could look really weird. It could look really glaring, you know, and just like piece by piece, you kind of lose the character of the building. There's some stuff that you can put on. I mean, they still make, you know, that same profile and other materials, but you know, it can look weird. You just want to be really careful. Yeah. No, great question. Right. Yeah, sure, of course. All right.
Hey,
Anybody
Michelle,
else?
I have one more
Yeah.
question. This is Julie. So,
Sure.
I don't think we really have encountered this issue before, but just thinking through different time periods for buildings can have different important qualities, so to speak. So let's say we had a building that had a couple different important time periods, and the owner wasn't, you know, was sort of mixing the two. Let's say they had something at the turn of the century and something they had like in, I don't know, maybe the late 1890s and like the 30s or 40s or something to that effect. This is a bad example,
Sure,
but you know what I mean. And so generally what happens, I think, in the preservation world is the time period is selected, and then it's going to be restored back to that particular time, and generally that's associated with a person or an event or something like that. So in the case of like encountering that type of challenge, or if an applicant has that kind of challenge, like how, let's say they want to use the earlier time period, but they have historic elements from the past, like how do we kind of balance our, you know, the certificate of appropriateness and those types of requests depending on how they've chosen? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that completely makes sense to me. And this is different for every case, obviously. One of the things you can do, one of the things that's done in preservation is something called the period of significance for the building. So, I mean, that can be something like when you know, if you had, you know, somebody that was like a pioneer in the county or something that lived there, you know, in the 1880s, or, you know, an event happened there in the 1950s. You know, there's kind of all, there's different reasons why a building might have a period of significance, and it's not always the original time when the building was built. So think about this. The Martin Luther King birth house, the home that he was actually born in Atlanta, is from like the 1880s. but that's not the period of significance for that house. This is like a Queen Anne, house, and there's a lot of them like that nearby, and it's a cool house. It's got, kind of its historic features and stuff, but that is definitely not the time period that was the period of significance for that house. The period of significance for this 1880 house was when the King family lived there, right? So that was a completely different era. He wasn't even alive in the 1880s. So you think about this, you've got a house that looks from a certain period when it was first built, but that's not when it was historically important. So that's one of the things you want to think about, and that is something that you can add to the nomination form when you have those written up. It's one of the things that the National Register asks for. You might even look at some of the National Register nominations and see how those are laid out with the period of significance. Sometimes the period of significance will be a really long period of time. You might have periods of significance. Sometimes you've got that, somebody famous lived there and then something really important happened there 40 years later, right? Those all get a little bit tricky in terms of, what time to preserve. But, when you're just talking about, a regular building and you're talking about the significance of the materials and the styles from the different periods, it's kind of like the, I think it was Secretary of the Interior Standard 3, where they talk about oh no, it's Standard 4, that things have gained significance in their own right. So you have to think about that. When you look at something, I mean, there is something cool and there is something historic about the natural evolution of a historic building. Like I showed you that one photo of the 1879 or something building, and it had that 1950s storefront on the bottom. I mean, I literally had somebody call me a while ago, I think it was in Walla Walla, and they were distressed on the commission about what to do because the owner of a building, very similar situation, wanted to get rid of the 1950s storefront, at the bottom. And it was like, well, that would be a loss, if that was gone. So that's something that you have to think about. If the owner of, say that you're reviewing something and the house was built in 1890 or something like that, and the owner wants to take it back to the original period of the house, then they're going to want to have pictorial evidence for that. It's again, one of those like no conjecture things. If they can show you photos and some evidence of what that house looked like originally, right, that they can actually restore some of that stuff because some of those elements are going to be gone, then that's okay. That's when you want to consider that. But again, that's more of a restoration because you're restoring it to what it looked like at another period. But that is okay in circumstances like that. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, working with the mute here. Yes.
That's okay. Okay.
Yes, imperative significance was the word I was looking for. So,
yes.
Yes, and like you said, it can get tricky if there are more than one period of significance. But I mean, I haven't necessarily encountered that here yet.
But you could.
Yeah, but even with the Martin Luther King Jr. example, though, I think it's a really good example. In many cases, a lot of buildings kind of kept their original character and quality, even though it's in a totally different time period, in part because people, economically may not have wanted to make changes or updates or what have you. So it would be, there'd still have to be that pictorial evidence of any changes in his time period if that was something you were going to restore it to or take it back to.
When you're talking about restoring something that was there, you really want to make sure that there's a good argument for that. And the best argument for that is pictorial evidence. Right. If you can find it, and if you can't find it, then doing things like referencing McAllister's and what should be in there for a building of that time period would make sense. I really want to leave you with that. There's no, you have a lot of leeway as a commission, and I know that sometimes you just want, like a black and white, answer to something. But one of the great things is that you do have leeway, and there's no really set in stone anything. Every instance, every application is a little bit different. Sometimes, the approach can be different. If somebody wants to restore something, that's a different approach. It's you don't need to be rigid about stuff. There really is. There are ways of working out all kinds of different issues in preservation. And again, if you've got questions about anything, even if it's a very particular thing that you're stumped on, call me. I can help. I can help you. just, brainstorm and think about how to look at it, and sometimes there's lots of solutions. Sometimes there's several different solutions.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, of course. All right. Anybody else?
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
I appreciate your time tonight.
Sure, I appreciate everybody showing up. You guys are doing a great job. And again, you've got a really good website. Your nomination forms look good, impressive. Keep in touch. I can come back. We can talk about more materials. I was going to try to cram citing and all of that stuff into tonight, but I really didn't want to overwhelm you. So we can talk about that more at their meeting if you want to.
We can have you back as a guest.
Yes, you can anytime. Just let me know. And Zoom makes it really easy. You can come
Thank
in
you very
person, too. I
much.
can always come in person. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle.
Sure. Good night.
We're going to move on now to the Heritage Farm Wetlands Update Project Overview. And we have Rocky Houston with Clark County Public Works here for this item. Good evening, Mr. Houston.
Actually, I think you can hear me. I'm Lindy Wallach, and I'm going to be filling in for Rocky, even though he's here.
Okay. Well, I wrote your name down as a participant, and so we want to welcome you to Clark County Clark County Historic Preservation Commission. Please go ahead, Ms. Wallach.
Thank you. All right, I think you can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Lindy Wallach. I'm a brand new park planner in the Parks and Lands Division for Clark County Public Works. And I've been asked to give an update on the Heritage Farm Wetland Restoration Project. Start off with a little bit of information on our project team and start out with the parks folks, since that's who I'm a member of. Rocky Houston is our Parks and Lands Division Manager, and he is acting as the client for the project. I am the Parks Planner, and I'm working as the project representative. So I'm working with the project manager from our engineering department on a regular basis. David Stipe is new to Clark County as well. He's our new planning manager. He was unable to join us tonight, but he's assisting with design review from the parks perspective. And our Public Works Engineering and Design Group, we have Isaac McConnell. He's a Public Works engineer, and he is the project manager for the project. He's taken over for Robin Washington, who retired earlier this year, and I believe Isaac has joined us this evening. Jeff Schnabel is our Public Works Clean Water Program Manager. He's the project representative. Our Clean Water program is actually the sponsor for the project. The funding for the project is coming from Clean Water. It's just occurring on a parks facility site. Stephanie DeMars is our Public Works engineer, and she is the designer for the project. I don't believe she's here tonight. And Audrey, and we are doing the design in-house. The Public Works group, the engineering group is doing the design themselves. Audrey Riddell is our representative for Public Works environmental permitting, but we've also have a consultant on board from WSP, formerly Berger ABAM, who's our environmental permitting consultant, Dustin Day. The two pictures here on the site or on the right are from our project site. The top one is facing east to the site, and the bottom one on the bottom is facing southeast towards the agricultural areas. So you can kind of see that brown grassy area is the existing channel that would be restored. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the project, some benefits, and give you an update on the project status, and also give you a little bit of information on our master plan update. The primary purpose of the project is to provide improved water quality to Cougar Creek, which would in turn provide improved water quality to Salmon Creek. The existing channel or pipe is part of the headwater wetland of the Cougar Creek subwatershed of the Salmon Creek watershed. The 2010 Clark County Stream Health Report identified that the Cougar Creek subwatershed as being in poor health for water quality, biological health, and flow control. This project will create a series of cascading shallow wet cells along the existing channel area to improve the function of the headwater wetland. Additionally, the most recent update to the Heritage Farm Master Plan called for enhancement of the creek corridor and wetlands areas, and this project will help us meet that goal. Pictured here is the Salmon Creek watershed. The entire Cougar Creek watershed is not pictured, but if you can see my cursor down here around Hazeldale, this is where the Heritage Farm site is, and the Cougar Creek subwatershed feeds into this Salmon Creek watershed. So we'll talk about some benefits to the project. Restoration will provide substantial wetland creation and enhancement as defined by county and state regulations. The work is going to increase the infiltration and retention of stormwater runoff in the man-made channel and the floodplain bench, which will provide improved water quality and flow control. It's also going to increase groundwater recharge, raise groundwater elevations, and increase groundwater storage within the watershed. And the site essentially is going to become much wetter and have a lot more wetland vegetation in the lower areas, much more like it was in its natural condition. The two photos here on the right are not from the site, but they're just an example. The one on the top is would be like a before restoration, and the one on the bottom would be an example of after restoration. The master plan benefits would be that this project will help us meet the goal in the approved master plan to enhance existing wetland corridor. Additionally, it will help us maintain existing creek crossings and connect to future interpretive trails on the site, and of course provide some educational opportunities for visitors. Right, so the project status. The 30% design submittal was issued for review in November of 2021. I'm just going to kind of give you a little overview of this site. This is the plan view of what was provided. The northern edge of this drawing or image would be 78th Street, so the top is facing north. This is the western border. There's a residential area along this side. And on the eastern border is some Clark County right-of-way, and then the Cowlitz tribe property. Water flow along this restoration corridor is from east to west. This is a very early iteration of plan design, and it doesn't have a ton of detail that some people really want to see or are excited to see. But the subsequent design submittals will provide more substantial information. Just kind of as an overview, there's these bright out, and the next two slides will have kind of blow-ups of this western half and the eastern half, so you'll see a little bit more detail. But these bright pink lines here in the center would be the boundaries of the wet cells. There's a series of 7 cells along here, along the corridor. And these are the boundaries where we would intend to have standing water. The dark blue boundaries that surround the wet cells, you can see a internal boundary and then an external. These would be this would be a planted vegetative buffer of about 35 feet in width that would surround the site. Surround the restoration area. And along this developed line here, it's not reflected, but it would fit in here and it would be there. It's just not necessarily accurately reflected here. There's a red zigzag line that kind of a red line, dash line that kind of zigzags through the center here. I don't know if you can really see it on your screens. But this is an existing sanitary sewer line, and a part of this project is going to be to remove this sanitary sewer line and move it, relocate it north of the planted buffer area so that it can be accessed and maintained after restoration. What's not shown here is a regulatory buffer, which would be an unplanted buffer that would extend and overlap over the 35-foot wide buffer, but it would extend, we think, about 100 feet from the edge of all of the pink wet cell boundaries here. While this shouldn't cause issues with maintenance to existing development or agricultural activities, even though it would kind of overlap in these areas down here and up on this property up here, part of the property up here, it does have the potential to cause issues with future site development that's planned for this northeast corner of the property. So we're taking a little extra time during this design stage to understand those potential impacts and to make changes where we can at this point. So this next slide will be a blow up of that western half of the previous drawing, so you can see the existing WSU, the facility that WSU is using right here. Here you can see the existing weather stations. There's a very tall WSU weather station. Whoops, sorry. WSU weather station that's right here, a tower. And it has a fence on it if you're out on the site. And then this is a NOAA weather station. And you could see if this was constructed as designed, these would be within the wet boundaries of the wet cell, or the boundaries of the wet cells, so they'd be underwater. So we have a plan to correct this design to make this work, and we're going to bench out the area around this existing, around the WSU weather station, so the elevation change wouldn't change here. And then we've worked with NOAA, and they're going to relocate this weather station to an area adjacent to the WSU weather station. And they did confirm that even with that slight move for NOAA, that it wouldn't impact the historical nature of the continuous data recording that's been going on for something like 100 years, I think, for these weather stations. So this drawing also shows this westernmost gravel driveway where you would connect to the parking area, connect the parking area over to the agricultural area, and then also to future trails. I'll go over to the eastern half. Here you can see this is that eastern gravel driveway or path that will have the split row fence on either side. You can see the sewer line a little bit better here, and the buffer. So we had a public open house was held in late January of 2022, where this design was presented to the public for discussion. Most of the questions and concerns from the public at that time was focused on impacts to user groups and areas for future development of the site that are within the scope of the master plan. And we've kept track of all of the comments that were made, and we'll be using those for consideration for the remainder of the project, and also the, master plan update, or continued work on the master plan. Current activities. If you were to visit the site today, you might see survey stakes popping up outside of the planned restoration areas. These are to help locate any existing utility interferences that might need to be taken care of or taken into consideration for the rest of the design. Sometime this summer, NOAA is going to come out and relocate their weather station to the area that I showed earlier. We're also meeting with federal, state, and local or county regulatory agencies to review the design progress and to make sure that we're maintaining compliance with the grant that's partially funding this project from the Department of Ecology. The designers are working towards design of the 65% progress set, which is anticipated to be released later this year in the summer. I want to give just a really brief update on the business plan development, master plan update. The Heritage Farms master plan update was approved by council in March of 2020 with the requirement for the development of a business plan to allow Heritage Farm to improve on cost recovery. Since we're all fairly new to the county, parks folks, we're starting from the beginning. We're gathering historical information, developing stakeholder lists, and fledging out project schedules and an approach for how we're going to develop the plan. And here, this is an image from that 2020 approved plan, by the plan that was approved by the council, and you can see the wetland restoration here. This is a good generic orientation for potential future development in that northeast corner, and you can see the trail interpretive trails that were included and I referenced earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't quite done with that. Roughly, the development of this business plan would include hiring a consultant to assist with public outreach and plan development. Any outreach would involve this commission, WSU, farm user groups, and other stakeholders, and especially including the public. And then also we've been reviewing and assisting with the development of a plan by WSU to identify current operations at the Heritage Farm site. And we would consider this in the development of our business plan as well. So who to contact? If you have any questions regarding the business or master plan, or any general questions regarding the restoration project, you can give me a call or an email, whichever is easiest for you. If you have big picture questions about Heritage Farm and use of the property and agreements, or other park questions, you could reach out to Rocky Houston. Isaac is here and available for technical questions regarding the wetland restoration project, so feel free to reach out to him. So I will
Thank you
open it
very
up
much.
to questions. Thank you. I think I'm sorry, my video is frozen for some reason, but I think you saw my presentation.
Any questions for Ms. Wallach? Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having us.
We'll move on now to committee updates and announcements. The Vancouver Heritage Overlay Code Committee met recently. Bart, would you like to make any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a couple brief comments, and then feel free to piggyback on that if you think of anything else. We have been able to initiate some very good substantive contact between county staff and city staff in the last couple weeks, which being new to this project, I felt needed to happen, since at the end of the day, this is based in city code, and it was a very productive initial conversation, and we've gotten very positive feedback from Josh and Mark, and also Greg at the city, that they want to be more involved in this process. And then last week we were able to finally coordinate with our example applicant from last year, which Susan and I were not directly involved in the project, but Joe Squires, his project on Main Street was held out by folks on both sides as a great example of a good project with a lot of input that he could add. And so Joe graciously donated about an hour of his time last week to speak to us about his experience. And it was very useful from my perspective. You might also want to add a comment to it. And Josh and Mark from the city weren't able to attend, but Greg was there, and he listened and had a couple comments. And what I took away from that exchange was that we're ready to really bring city staff into this process, and whenever the committee members are ready and have the capacity to work on this, staff can be ready to how should I say this, facilitate whatever the next steps the committee thinks that should be, whether it should be stakeholder outreach, more stakeholder outreach, more substantive code research, anything that the committee wants. But I think another committee meeting is probably the next step. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Andy.
I think that's well summarized. Want to have it in the record that Mr. Squires was very helpful, that he highlighted areas in which the Historic Preservation Commission could be proactive in helping applicants to understand the process. And I was pleased that he thought that the staff was so helpful, and that his experience in the meeting with the Historic Preservation Commission was positive. It surprised him the degree to which it was positive. And if you recall, this is the former Lucky Loan storefront, and we were talking about the stained glass window that identified the Dunnigan building, and that Mr. Squires has located the existing window and has arranged to make a lighted replica of the Donegan stained glass feature, and he was delighted to share that that had come to fruition. And I wanted to let him know that we hadn't forgotten about the promise to help him track it down, but he was able to do it, and it was a very enjoyable hour for the committee, for the commissioners, as well as the citizens. And Mr. Squires has invited us for a site visit when the project is heading toward completion at the end of April of 2022. So that's my input.
Andy,
Yes, so if go ahead.
Go ahead. Is that Greg?
Bart. No, this is Jason.
Oh, okay, Jason.
Yeah, so I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Bart said. So we've been in communication with county staff, and I think from our standpoint, because the heritage overlays are both in the city, that we're wanting some more information from the HPC in terms of, I guess, engaging more in some real discussion in terms of what you're looking to do in terms of any type of revisions to the heritage overlay code section. We haven't really talked about that in any detail to this point. We're certainly happy to participate and listen to what you have to say. And I think for us, anytime we're talking about potential code changes, those things take time. They also require Planning Commission and City Council approval. We tend to do our code changes one time a year annually, which usually happens in October. So just from a timeline perspective, if we were going to do anything this year, we'd be very challenged to get that done in time to actually happen this year. That's not to say we can't do the work this year and in preparation for maybe having the code change if one was needed. Let's say in 23, we could certainly look at. But again, without knowing what we're talking about, it's hard to make assumptions. But with that, I will say that whatever potential proposed changes we're looking at, we would also need to do some significant outreach with our development community stakeholders so that we have buy-in from everybody at the table. So that's all I really wanted to add, and I'm certainly able to answer any questions that you might have too.
It's a really good point, and more to the point, understanding what the is going on in the heritage overlay districts and how the code operates. The commission with the exception of Jan Bader, faces a fairly steep learning curve in understanding its operation. And so as opposed to contemplating changes for this year, I think it's more tuition and instruction to familiarize colleagues with how things operate. And so there's, like I say, it's not well understood. And I'm talking about by me, and I've been dealing with it for 15 years. So there you go.
Yeah.
But thanks very much, Jason.
Yeah, we're more
Go ahead.
certainly happy to help and answer any questions that you have along the way. And we want to be good partners in all this. So just let us know.
I appreciate that very much. City of Vancouver has announced that there will be an RFQ for the Main Street project, and Jan has brought this to our attention. And Jan, would you be so kind as to update us on this aspect?
Sure, and Jason, feel free to chime in here. I'm sure you know more about this than I do. But the City of Vancouver has done a request for qualifications for a consultant, because it looks like we're finally going to be, the city, sorry, I'm still doing is finally going to be able to do the upgrades to Main Street that have been in the plans for the last 15 to 20 years. So the timeline for the proposals from the consultants closed on, I think, the 23rd of February. So hopefully you got a good response. And but the reason I wanted to bring this up is because the Preservation Commission is one of the parties that the consultant will need to talk to as they're developing the design standards and the design for Main Street. So I just wanted to get this on people's radar that at some point in the next few months, whoever the consultant that the city selects will want to talk to the commission about what we want to see included in the redesign of Main Street. So just an opportunity for us to think about that, and maybe depending on the timeline at one of our upcoming meetings, maybe just have a preliminary discussion about the things that the commission will be looking for in the design of of Main Street. There is a design which I believe is about 15 years old now, but I think they're gonna be doing a brand new one. And I don't know, Jason, it doesn't sound like this is gonna be as complete of a design as the last one, which was kind of, building front to building front. It sounds like there's somewhat of a reduced budget, so it won't maybe be as broad as the design from 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's
I just wanted
exactly
to know this is coming.
Yeah, thanks, Jan, and you're exactly right. So I just put together some quick bullet points here that kind of highlight what the improvements include. They'll take place on Main Street between 5th and 15th. Reconstruction of existing sidewalks, replacement of new water and sanitary sewer lines, all existing street lighting with some decorative LED fixtures, place some street furnishings, bike racks, garbage containers and benches, overhead festoon lighting, which is like the the popular bulb lighting that you see overhead everywhere these days. That's called festoon lighting. I didn't even know that. I actually had to look it up. So that'll be occurring. And so like Jan said, we're in the early stages with the RFQ. And once it's we figure out who the party's going to be, we'll start planning in 2022 with the goal of constructing everything in 2023. And I've made a commitment. I've talked to Teresa Brum, who's kind of leading this effort for the city, along with Brian Laposa, who's with our Public Works Department. I've asked Teresa to make sure that she puts it on her radar to come to an upcoming HPC meeting to talk to you more in depth about all of this once we have a better idea of who the parties involved in the plan will be. And I think she was anticipating either the May or June meeting for an update, but we'll know more as we get closer to that point in time. So that's about all I know in regard to this at this point.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Jan. Bart, would you like to review our rules and procedures situation, please?
Yeah, happy to speak to that. I would like to say first that it was our original intent to have that first section for you guys to have a substantive review discussion at this meeting. After stepping back and looking at what we had, and that first section being really the meat of some of the more legal and process oriented aspects of it, we decided in consultation with Jackie and to bring it to our county council first and really let Chris have a good look at it, because we did not want to put ourselves in a position where we had you guys spend a bunch of your good time on it and then we'd have to rip it apart again after legal got a hold of it. And so we pulled it off the agenda for this month, and I'm sorry for the kind of last minute change in that, but it's probably for the best, and it will.
It sounds like a prudent move.
So when you say when you say it's going to the county council, that's the county attorney, not the actual county council.
Yeah. I'm sorry. And I've been a planner for so long that when I say council, I'm talking about a lawyer, and not the
actual
county council.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a COUNSEL as opposed to CIL.
Yeah, the
Okay,
EL versus the IL, exactly. And
Gotcha.
I think and then with her looking at it and having that level of review on the front end, it will make everything smoother on the back end. And having spoken with Jackie about her recent experience with the planning commission rules and procedures update, it just seemed prudent. So whether that will be ready for review next month, I don't want to say that right this moment, but that's what we're doing. So thanks for everybody's patience. The project
Sure,
is
keep us posted.
Yeah, thank you.
Susan has an update regarding CLG grants.
I do. So Bart and Jackie and I were in a meeting the other day, and we had a conversation. We don't have a project planned right now for applying for a CLG grant. Also, with us being relatively new, we are not planning on applying for a CLG grant for this round, which those are due April 29th. But Jackie wanted us to talk to you about that and let you know that's generally what we were thinking, and see if you had any concerns with that as our plan.
Colleagues, any comments?
Andy?
Yes.
I know that we were talking about in our meeting about the heritage overlay, and especially listening to Jason in the city and the guidance that the city is asking the commission for in regards to the code, and are not being necessarily the right people to be able to answer that, and perhaps going after, if not this year, maybe perhaps next year, a CLG grant to help help formulate the code and help rewrite the code from people who understand how to rewrite code, not myself, for instance.
Understood. I made a note of that.
Thanks, Andy.
And that's for the historic overlay district, Oregon.
Yes, yeah, for the overlay code committee, when we had one of our meetings, we talked about getting a grant to bring in a professional to help rewrite the code so that we could give something to the city so that they could have something that they could really work with when they go to really tackle rewriting that code. So it's not all this work put upon the city when they're maybe not even the best people. Like we're maybe not the best people to do it either.
Got it. I made that note. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, we're at good of the order now, and I would like to ask that that we arrange to have a certificate of appreciation for Feli Garcia's service, and wonder if we could approve that. I would like to recognize her contributions to the Historic Preservation Commission.
That sounds
Any
great,
other items
Andy.
on good of the order? Pardon?
That sounds great, Andy.
Oh, okay, thank you. Any other items for good of the order?
Real quick, along the lines of her departure, we're meeting with the county staff tomorrow to talk about the replacement and the recruitment for that position. That was a city-appointed position, so the city will be in charge of finding that replacement. So we'll be moving on that shortly, just as an FYI to you all.
Thank you. I will make sure to contact Michelle Thompson to thank her for her presentation tonight.
And we'll do that as staff as well. And I'll work on the certificate for Feli.
And I really appreciated having an opportunity to receive information as a commission tonight. That continuing education piece is very important. And hopefully when we get back to in-person meetings, we could ask for other members of the professional organizations to periodically make appearances before the commission. I think it's good relationship building.
Can you, we can work on setting that up. When you say other groups in the professional organization, can you just give me a little bit more about what you're thinking there?
Sure. In the past, we've had representatives from DAP who have come and made us aware of other kinds of considerations to help us do our job better, and also to bring up new scholarship, because those are the kinds of sessions that we formerly were able to attend, but have done so rarely and only remotely in the last couple of years. And so I think it's a service not only to the community, but to the serving commissioners and staff to be apprised of changes in the laws, changing trends, updates, improvements to make our practice better.
Okay. Thank you.
Hearing no further items for good of the order, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Was that Julie or Paige?
Jan.
Jan. Okay. Thank you, Jan. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Thank you, Morgan. And thank you, Greg. It's been moved and seconded that the meeting be adjourned. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, colleagues, very much for an excellent meeting this evening, and thank you, staff, for having it go so well.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Good night.